Donald Trump says imposing tariffs on India over its purchase of Russian oil is not an easy thing to do, admitting it creates tensions between the two nations. In a Fox and Friends interview, Trump said he placed a 50% tariff on India due to its continued oil trade with Russia, calling it a big deal that has caused a rift. Trump also claimed he had resolved several global conflicts during his second term, including those in the Congo, Rwanda, and even between Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, India has defended its Russian oil imports, saying its decisions are driven by national interest and market dynamics. Trump's ambassador nominee to India, Sergio Gore, emphasized that the administration wants India to buy American oil instead, citing India's growing middle class as a key market. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick added that a trade deal with India could progress once it halts its Russian oil imports. Let's take a listen in to what the US president had to say on the issue.
Look, India was their biggest customer. I put a 50% tariff on India because they're buying oil from Russia. That's not an easy thing to do. That's a big deal. And it causes a rift with India.
We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Jua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and a senior economist, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Dr. Jua, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here on the program. Dr. Jua, of course, these 50% tariffs are significant, especially when India and United States relations previous to the second Trump presidency seemed to be very strong. How have you analysed the impact of these tariffs? And also, of course, Donald Trump's synopsis on India's purchase on Russian oil and how that might impact future negotiations?
Thank you for having me. I think the 50% tariffs on India, probably a little more than 50% actually, because on 100 we are paying another 25% is the basic tariff. So on 125, another 25 gets added, which comes to close to about 157, 158%. The question is that math apart, the question is, it is hurting India. There is no doubt about it. It's been on for 3 weeks, the higher tariffs of 25%, and for about 2 weeks, the higher tariffs of 50% itself, which came into effect from the 27th or 28th of August. New orders upon India are taking cognizance of the fact that such duties are liable to be paid by the importers. So India's competitiveness vis-a-vis its peers is getting impacted, and certainly it is something which India is able to manage for the time being, but unless these are revisited, it could cause a fair amount of diversion of trade from India to other countries, and as well as in the short term itself impact the production and the employment in the labor-intensive industries, which are more prone to be hit. Or roughly speaking, about $30 to $35 billion worth of Indian exports to the US out of the 86 billion which we had last year are likely to be impacted. Whether they will come down to zero or they will take a hit, and in which case it is about 20 to 25 billion of the tariffs get impacted. The question about oil imports from the US, crude oil, India is open to that idea. I don't think India has ever said that we are not going to be buying the crude oil from the US. All that we are seeking is let it be competitively priced. If we get the price, if we get from another source cheaper, and we have to look at the whole cost, including the transportation cost from the US to the Indian ports, we would be happy to buy from the US. We have said that in the past, and that continues to be our stand even today. Second, we have taken measures in order to progress our bilateral discussions with the US, which were interrupted on the 25th of August last year, when the team which was to come from the US was not dispatched. We have kind of taken action, and a major port in India on the western Mundra, where about 10% of the imported crude oil was coming and feeding the refineries in northern India, that has declared that it will not be dealing with any sanctioned imports. That means the imports from Russia fall in that category, and those will probably have to go to another port, not to the major port of Mundra or any of its satellite ports. It has 7 or 8 ports under its umbrella. The Adani is a free trade zone. So in all those 7 or 8 of them, I think we will not be importing the Russian oil.
Yes, Dr. Dewar, this comes as Scott Bessent, US Treasury Secretary, has called upon G7 nations and the European Union, all of which are very strong supporters of Ukraine, apart from the United States, to also impose tariffs on that of China and that of India. How, if these countries do follow what the US says, how much could that hurt the Indian economy as well?
Certainly, the European Union, which has most of the other G7 countries as its members, and the appeal from President Trump's administration is to all the G7 members to impose these secondary tariffs on India for importing from Russia, for continuing to import crude oil from Russia, I think will impact India. Our trade with the European Union is about higher than our trade with the US, $135 billion last year. Our imports probably from there are much more than we have the imports from the US. So, but these tariffs are on the exports, as you know, to that extent, a little less than the impact than it is on the tariffs imposed by the US, because our exports to the EU are a little less. But nevertheless, we would get impacted, and I think the G7 countries are, as of now, holding up because they realize that the European Union itself has been using Russian oil, importing energy from there, particularly of gas, which goes all the way through the pipelines built from Russia to as far as Germany. And as the winter is approaching, EU countries would need to have this oil flow maintained. So I'm not sure whether President Trump's appeal would be heeded to by them of imposing 100% tariff on the crude oil on India as well as China.
Yes, Dr. Ajay Dewar, thank you very much for joining us here on the program and taking the time. We stay in the Indo-Pacific